Welcome, fellow students, to the Miracle Mind podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and today the course is walking us through some logistics in the awakening process. We're going to cover the true purpose of the human body as a means for ascension, as well as what begins the awakening process within us. We're also going to take a look at spiritual vision and how it is a tool for us to see with our true eye. If I could, I want to, as an intro here to the material, get a little bit ahead of myself, as I'm known to do. There is a section in the course in Miracles that we are working with today. And also, by the way, I should mention we are dealing with Chapter 2, Section 3, The Altar of God. And towards the middle of this passage, which I will be reading to all of you, it goes over that for many of us, and in fact, almost, I would say, maybe even all of us, the impetus for awakening is the deep, profound realization that there must be a better way. For many of us, again, I would venture a guess, all of us, in order to awaken spiritually, we must be brought to our knees. We must be brought to a place where, wanting to say we have nothing left to lose, or just rather, it feels that we have nothing left to lose. That we are brought to this deep place of surrender and sort of almost like we're spinning our wheels. We don't know which direction to turn, but we know deeply and profoundly that there must be a better way. Also, quick note for editing, Sarah, let's go ahead and title this episode, There Must Be a Better Way, because that phrase, it's such a deep, emotional, real, visceral feeling to have when you have just been going through it. Life has really taken its toll on you and you are brought to your knees. Jesus, take the wheel. Deep and profoundly, there must be a better way. And I start with this because as I'm filming this on Friday, June 13th. There are a lot of really tense and upsetting things happening in the world. And I won't recount all of them because I like this podcast to be a space we can go to explore new ideas, learn, and kind of, not get sucked into and wallow in what's happening in the world. But it's worth mentioning that phrase, there must be a better way. It seems very, very relevant for what is going on in the world around us. Humans have been trying to solve their problems through listening to the voice of the ego for a very long time. And the voice of the ego almost always naturally brings us to this place where physical violence, even emotional and verbal violence, are not only justified, but they are necessary. This is what the ego tells us. We are under threat. We must be scared. We must protect ourselves. And so naturally, listening to the insane voice of the ego mind, violence, war are the natural conclusion. Yet, there must be a better way. I know there's a lot of talk, and there has been for a while in the spiritual community about a collective awakening process, and I also believe that this is happening, absolutely. But a huge part of that is that those members of our collective that are not yet ready and or willing and or aware of the fact that there is a better way must first be brought to that surrender point. And so that is what we are witnessing now on a very large scale. And I think each and every single one of us individually also is walking a similar walk, though it may be dramatically less in scale for most of us. Being brought to that surrender point, that point of desperately saying to ourselves, there must be a better way. My God, I've been spinning my wheels for decades trying to do this the ego's way. I've been trying to prevent. I've been trying to control. I've been trying to see into the future so I can know what's coming and do everything in my power to make it stop. I've been controlling, or trying to control. everything for so long, and not only has it not worked, it's driven me mad. There must be a better way. And the good news is there is. Not only is there a better way, there's a way in which you're actually connected to truth, reconnecting to what we actually are through the mechanism of surrender and presence. Not only is it a better way, it's the true way. It is the truth. And all else, all violence, all separation, all duality is as it's always been, an illusion, a creation of our distorted ego mind. So that is our backdrop for today's episode. Again, we are working with Chapter 2, Section 3, The Altar of God. We are dealing with 5 paragraphs, so nothing we can't handle in this episode. I know we've had some episodes with a lot of reading. This one's a pretty moderate one. But what I will recommend is that as I'm reading the passages from A Course in Miracles, enter a meditative-like state. Treat this like a little bit of a ritual or a ceremony, and allow the words to just wash over you. Don't stress yourself out trying to understand every word that is spoken. Sometimes, full transparency, when I read A Course in Miracles, I have to do a couple passes. You know what I mean? There's some dense language for sure, and it takes a little bit of time and patience. I've also noticed that when dealing with a course, instead of trying to understand everything, feeling into it and using other senses besides the physical body and besides the analytical mind, also quite useful. So when I read the first pass, just allow the words to wash over you. And then we'll go through section by section and pull out the pieces that I feel particularly called to talk about. All right, then let us begin. The atonement can only be accepted within you by releasing the inner light. Since the separation, defenses have been used almost entirely to defend against the atonement, and thus maintain the separation. This is generally seen as a need to protect the body. The many body fantasies in which minds engage arise from the distorted belief that the body can be used as a means for attaining atonement. Perceiving the body as a temple is only the first step in correcting this distortion, because it alters only part of it. It does recognize that atonement in physical terms is impossible. The next step, however, is to realize that a temple is not a structure at all. Its true holiness lies at the inner altar around which the structure is built. The emphasis on beautiful structures is a sign of the fear of atonement and an unwillingness to reach the altar itself. The real beauty of the temple cannot be seen with the physical eye. Spiritual sight, on the other hand, cannot see the structure at all because it is perfect vision. It can, however, see the altar with perfect clarity. All right, so let's start at the very beginning, and I should mention, so the Course will use the word atonement in place of enlightenment. And we'll get into this more in future passages, but this is very intentionally done. A Course in Miracles is a process of enlightenment that uses the mechanism of forgiveness primarily. And you'll notice very often when I read these passages, there's a large focus in how we perceive others. So again, one of the main mechanisms that the Course uses for enlightenment is correcting the way that we view other humans. Because the asleep or egoic version of other humans is that we're all separate, right? I'm me and you're you. And the enlightened perspective would be one in which there is no separation. And of course, that is ultimate end stage consciousness or total enlightenment. So there are many stages along the way, but that is the end goal. And so the Course will use atonement in place of enlightenment. This does also keep with the tradition that the Course utilizes of traditional biblical language. However, instead of it being biblical in terms of religion, it's biblical in terms of the esoteric or metaphysical, mystical side. So, the first sentence, the atonement can only be accepted within you by releasing the inner light. Oh, I love this. So, firstly, I love that it says the atonement can only be accepted, because this implies that the ultimate true state of enlightened consciousness is not something that is bestowed upon you. Rather, it is something that you remember. It's something that you accept. And of course, the way that this is done is by releasing the inner light. Now, what is the inner light was kind of my first question when I read this sentence, because I think, language is difficult and our culture is very one-dimensional, I suppose, with the word light and dark. We kind of boil it down to good and bad, or, if we think of the phrase light workers, for example, which is a phrase I've used from time to time, by releasing the inner light, it seems to imply being happy, right? That the only way the atonement can be accepted is by releasing the inner light. This means you must be happy or be good. But in actuality, the more I meditated on it, the more I realized releasing the inner light, this is awareness. The inner light, the light in the darkness, to be a light worker in the face of darkness is simply to be aware, to bring conscious awareness to the mind, to the situation. And the more I'm working with the Course in my own life, the more I'm realizing the actual thing that I'm doing 9 times out of 10 when it comes to correcting the ego mind and choosing love over fear, really all I'm doing is bringing presence to what I'm doing and to what is happening in my mind. There is a lot of neutral observation and simple presence with what is. No resisting, no judging, no attempts to change in that moment. Just releasing the inner light. Almost like I'm shining a giant flashlight on what's happening in my mind. Let's move on. The Course then goes on to say that since the separation, defenses have been used almost entirely to defend against the atonement, and thus maintain the separation. So this is a little bit of logistics of what has been happening ever since consciousness fragmented off from source into the multitude of different perspectives that we now see on planet Earth. There has been this sort of perpetuating defense program. Almost like, and this is where things could get really quantum. And again, the Course is speaking in symbolic language for something that we very well may get quantum language for in the future, which would be very interesting. But essentially what the Course is getting into with this is the mechanism by which the ego mind perpetuates itself. And it goes on to say that the many body fantasies in which minds engage arise from the distorted belief that the body can be used as a means for attaining atonement. And what I'm getting from this, although to be honest with you, I had to read this sentence a couple of times to absorb it, but what I think I'm getting from this thus far is that the Course is wanting us to consider our bodies as something that we are in, is something that we are experiencing life through. And of course, it does go on to say perceiving the body as a temple is the first step in correcting this. And so the Course is by no means saying that the body is unclean or not sacred, because it's very specifically calling it a temple. And temples are revered places. They are locations, they are structures, but they are very sacred, very holy, very respected. In fact, you go to the temple to connect to God, right? So it all becomes quite a bit confusing as you start to awaken. You remember bits and pieces of what you truly are. And there's this moment where you realize, oh my God, for like 30 years, I've been thinking I'm my body, right? I've been very closely identified with the fact that I am this body. But now I'm starting to remember, no, 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 I think I'm actually something else entirely. And then there can be a little bit of confusion or distortion where, okay, so then I must reject the body. I must deny the body. And for many spiritual traditions, this is an avenue that is used. A lot of times there will be traditions that deny bodily needs, like fasting, for example, or meditating for several hours. And it's not to say that that cannot be an effective strategy. It's not, however, what the Course is recommending. And it's also, on a personal note, not what I would recommend either. I actually quite like the way Eckhart Tolle, who is a teacher that I'm referencing quite a bit on this podcast, and I kind of like that. I really like Eckhart. He reminds me, I say this with utmost respect, but he reminds me a little bit of Winnie the Pooh in the very warm, and I enjoy listening to him, being in his presence kind of feeling. Regardless, I love the way Eckhart talks about the body. He refers to it, and I'm going to have to paraphrase here, but he refers to it essentially as it's not to say that you're not your body, it's just to say that you are in the body. That the thing you actually are is within the body and is experiencing through the body. And Eckhart will recommend bringing presence and awareness to the sensations of the body as a vehicle for being in the now. When I read his book, The Power of Now, this was the practice he recommended, was to bring full presence to what is, and the mechanism for that is to be present with the body. And I've been using that a lot lately, and I gotta tell you, very helpful. Not only is it helpful for nervous system regulation, it is very helpful in remembering what I actually am. And so again, the Course is referring to the body as a temple. It is a location. The body is a location for what you actually are. It is a place that you are in, a sacred place and a holy place, to be clear, but a place that you are in rather than the thing that you are. It goes on to say that its true holiness lies at the inner altar around which the structure is built. This makes me think of the inner body, the light body. This is referred to by many spiritual teachers as well. It's not to say the external body, the body that we see, is the temple. Rather, it is the internal body. And I'm not necessarily talking about the organs here. It's less literal and more the way that you would visualize it, I suppose. That when you connect to the body, it's not to say you're looking at the eyes and the nose and your feet, but more so to say you're bringing awareness to the inner body. And I also love that it says the true holiness lies at the inner altar around which the structure is built. This makes me think of the heart space. In fact, many times when I bring awareness to the body, what I'm doing is I'm focusing on the heart space. I am drawing my attention and my consciousness from the head to the heart. And I think this is where our species is headed as we navigate this collective awakening to be more heart-based. What that means beyond being more loving and more empathetic and compassionate, and I view those more as byproducts, because what it actually is to pull the consciousness from the mind into the heart. It's a grounding act in a way, almost that middle space, I would say, between the head and the feet, which would be grounding. This heart space, this sacred heart space, is being referred to by the Course as the altar of God. The Course goes on to say, the real beauty of the temple, the body, cannot be seen with the physical eye. Spiritual sight, on the other hand, cannot see the structure at all because it is perfect vision. So this is where, to use spiritual vision, close your eyes and pull the consciousness into the body. This is how you connect to the inner body. This is spiritual sight. To utilize spiritual sight is not to look at your hands or look at yourself in the mirror. It is to connect to that inner vision. And that inner vision, ooh, there's something about this that's making my head buzz. That inner vision is the real vision. The physical eyes, though our experience on planet Earth is sacred and holy, as mentioned by the Course many times, the physical eyes can be utilized by the ego to solidify its own existence, because the physical eyes can be used to collect proof of separation, right? With my physical eyes, I can see where my body ends and another body begins. But our physical eyes, although necessary for our own survival, and again, our existence here is sacred, they're limited. They're not seeing all that there is. And our spiritual sight, on the other hand, can see all of it. And so when you utilize your spiritual sight to connect to the body, you can't see it as physical at all because it's a perfect source of vision. And the Course says that your spiritual vision can see the altar, the body, with perfect clarity. All right, let's move on to paragraph 2. For perfect effectiveness, the atonement belongs at the center of the inner altar, where it undoes the separation and restores the wholeness of the mind. Before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear, because fear did not exist. Both the separation and the fear are miscreations that must be undone for the restoration of the temple and for the opening of the altar to receive the atonement. This heals the separation by placing within you the one effective defense against all separation thoughts and making you perfectly invulnerable. This is hearkening back to, I think it was our first, one of our first episodes, where we were talking about the only way to be safe. And the only way to be truly safe is to reawaken, is to remember that you were never unsafe to begin with. So, starting at the beginning here, for the perfect effectiveness, the atonement, or enlightenment if you prefer, belongs at the center of the inner altar. This is the heart space. The center of the inner altar. This is the sacred heart space. And this is where all of those separation thoughts are undone, and where the wholeness of your mind is restored. This speaks of the destruction of duality and the reintegration of Christ consciousness within the body itself, or within the being itself. Before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear because fear did not exist. What I love about this is that all of our thoughts of fear, all of the delusions of fear, are a byproduct of the fact that we think we are separate, a byproduct of the fact that we still believe that we exist separately. It speaks to fully believing in the illusion, or I guess I should say, even partially believing in the illusion. The illusion is quite gripping. It is quite gripping. And I feel like I said this maybe in the last episode that I filmed. There can sometimes be this feeling of close but not quite, as you're undergoing the process of awakening, you'll get glimpses into what the Course is referring to as the atonement. And then you may go back to perceiving reality through the lens of duality. And the Course doesn't talk about, well, at least not the parts I've read so far, it doesn't talk a ton about this experience. It does emphasize commitment to the path over and over again, that even in those moments where the fear feels gripping, that the voice of the Holy Spirit is always available, right? Even in those moments where it is very difficult to see through the illusion, the true self, the Holy Spirit, the higher self, it's right there. It's right there within reach. And so the Course will, from time to time, recommend full commitment and encourage full commitment as a very patient and loving teacher. But yeah, all of the fear that we have inside of our minds, it comes from this original creation or delusion of separation. Both the separation and the fear are miscreations that must be undone for the restoration of the temple and for the opening of the altar to receive the atonement. Essentially, what this is saying is that before you can become fully enlightened, you must first undo all of the beliefs of separation. And this is what we refer to as the process of awakening. And basically, you wake up every day and you set the intention to choose love over fear. And then you allow what arises to arise. It's almost like, well, it is the perfect curriculum. In many ways, we set the intention to awaken before we even got here. And then each day that has unfolded since has been about us getting to the point where we surrender and allow the curriculum to run its course. You will face the exact triggers for you to see things that you've never seen before. And the part we need to participate in is the part of, again, going back to the very beginning, releasing the inner light, bringing the awareness. This is something very different for us. We're very encouraged to dissociate, to live in the mind, to view ourselves as the body and kind of just stumble through life, not really paying attention to what's going on up in our noggins. So that's the part we need to contribute. But yes, essentially what the Course is saying here is that the process, awakening occurs, ascension occurs through the correction of these fear thoughts. All right, moving on to paragraph 3. The acceptance of the atonement by everyone is only a matter of time. This may appear to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the final decision, but this is not so. You can temporize and you are capable of enormous procrastination, but you cannot depart entirely from your Creator who set the limits on your ability to miscreate. An imprisoned will engenders a situation which, in the extreme, becomes altogether intolerable. Tolerance for pain may be high, but it is not without limit. Eventually, everyone begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. As this recognition becomes more firmly established, it becomes a turning point. This ultimately reawakens spiritual vision, simultaneously weakening the investment in physical sight. The alternating investment in the two levels of perception is usually experienced as conflict, which can become very acute, but the outcome is as certain as God. So, few things I want to say about this. That last bit about the conflict or the seeming conflict between spiritual vision and physical vision, this becomes very acute, very painful. It reads as doubt, as confusion, disorientation. But the Course says the outcome is as certain as God. Oh my God, I love to hear this because you start to hear the voice of the ego. And all of a sudden, this rush of clarity comes just galloping in. And you're like, yes, yes, I see it. I see it all now. And then it's almost like the illusion starts to reestablish itself. Or more accurately, the voice of the ego gets a little louder, a little noisier, demands a little bit more attention. And then there's this feeling of, oh my God, I lost it. I've regressed. I've gone back. I'm never going to get through this. Well, the Course is reassuring you. The outcome of awakening is as certain as God. Basically, once the process has begun, it is only a matter of time that enlightenment transpires. Again, this paragraph started with the acceptance of the atonement by everyone is only a matter of time. Meaning, it has already happened. It's just a question of, from the vantage point in which we experience time, perhaps you are not there yet. It is as certain as God. I also love that it says you can temporize and you are capable of enormous procrastination. It's almost like a loving procrastination, or I referred to life as the perfect curriculum. It's almost like before you come here, you have this set of lessons pre-laid out, and then you get to make a ton of choices along the way that can either delay the awakening process, the remembering process, or can contribute to the awakening process. And I think, well, then we also fall down this rabbit hole trying to control the awakening process, right? And we're like, hold on, let me figure out where this thing is going, what my next piece of curriculum is going to be, and let me try and get 2 steps ahead of this thing. I'm definitely guilty of this, in the past. And I think what the Course would say to that is surrender. Be in the present moment. The part of you that wants to control and wants to know and wants to figure it out is the very part of you that is dying. And this is as sure as God. So surrender and allow and be present and watch it disintegrate and fall away. I also really like this passage. This ultimately reawakens spiritual vision, simultaneously weakening the investment in physical sight. What this makes me think of is as we go through the awakening process and we start to remember more and more of what we truly are, life, the physical world, it feels less serious in some ways. Not less important, because we recognize that it's, again, the perfect curriculum for us, but it feels less gripping, less addicting, less sharp and urgent. And in many ways, we're able to see that the idea of urgency is sort of this construct of the ego mind to keep itself relevant. This allows additional layers of peace and presence to come forth. Again, almost solidifying this idea that the more we start to see with our spiritual vision, the less invested we become in our physical vision. And if you find yourself in that position where the physical things you're seeing with your physical eyes are, again, becoming less and less urgent, less and less total, allow that process to unfold. This is a symptom or a side effect of your spiritual sight strengthening. Okay, let's move on to paragraph 4. Spiritual vision literally cannot see error and merely looks for atonement. All solutions the physical eye seeks dissolve. Spiritual vision looks within and recognizes immediately that the altar has been defiled and needs to be repaired and protected. Perfectly aware of the right defense, it passes over all others, looking past error to truth. Because of the strength of its vision, it brings the mind into its service. This reestablishes the power of the mind and makes it increasingly unable to tolerate delay, realizing that it only adds unnecessary pain. As a result, the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. You ever notice you're embarking upon an awakening journey and all of a sudden everything has just gotten much more difficult? The ego mind will use this to say you should drop all of this spirituality stuff because it's just making your life more difficult. But yeah, the ego mind will do this, and I've experienced this many times before. Walking a spiritual path is one of you're singularly focused. Again, it says spiritual vision literally cannot see error and merely looks for the atonement. Reconnecting to your spiritual vision is essentially saying the only thing that's happening right now is awakening. That is it. Your spiritual path stops becoming your spiritual path and just becomes your life. All that there is. Your spiritual vision, it's very focused on one thing and one thing alone, and that is, as the Course would call it, the atonement. reawakening, enlightenment. All solutions the physical eye seeks dissolve. This also speaks to the level of commitment, again, that the Course is urging us to have. And it's almost like, I don't want to say it happens to you, but that's kind of become my experience. You start off by, again, having that feeling that there must be a better way, and then you start seeking for that better way. And the more you do, the more you realize this is the only thing that's happening. And it becomes, I'm sort of seeing in my mind's eye like this fire that just rips through you and burns everything up in its path. As a result, again, it says the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it once would have regarded as a minor intrusion or discomfort. You become intolerant of your own egoic programming. I also had this experience a couple weeks ago where it was overwhelming. Listening, becoming aware of the ego mind, it became so overwhelming. I just didn't really want to talk. I still go through those periods sometimes. Makes it a little challenging to be a podcaster, YouTuber, but if I ever go silent for an extended period of time, just know I don't feel like talking because the ego mind and its incessant chatter and all of the subconscious default programs that it runs, it can become overwhelming. And again, the ego mind will use that sensation of overwhelm to discourage you from continuing. Luckily, the outcome is as certain as God. When you do feel those moments of overwhelm, that sort of rushing of like, oh God, wow, this is a lot. Presence. Slow down. Deep breath. One moment at a time. One thought at a time. The feeling of urgency, the feeling of overwhelm, the feeling of doubt are all byproducts of the you that is dying. You don't need to fight them. You don't need to deny them. All you need to do is shine your inner light on them. Watch them. Realize you're not them and let them float on by like they never existed in the first place. As the Course says, this reestablishes the power of the mind and makes it increasingly unable to tolerate delay, realizing that it only adds unnecessary pain. This is kind of like the snowball effect, right? You start off the awakening process. You start bringing presence to the mind, and then it becomes such a pattern to hear the voice of the ego that you almost can't stop it. You almost can't stop the awareness that is then built inside of you. Because of the strength of its vision, your spiritual vision, it brings the mind into service. Again, remember that spiritual vision cannot see error, it only looks for atonement. Your spiritual vision is not looking for problems, it is rapid fire correcting your inner vision to that of your true and natural state. It says, perfectly aware of the right defense, it passes over all others, looking past error to truth. This is also interesting. I know, something that can kind of happen at the beginning of the awakening process, or, also if you're working through what's going on in your mind without a spiritual backing, you can sometimes get fixated on the errors of the mind, right? You can pathologize yourself. You can create identities out of what your mind does, right? And you can overly identify with what the mind is doing. And so again, with your spiritual vision taking the helm, perfectly aware of the right defense, it passes over all others. It looks past error to truth. All right, let's go ahead and read paragraph 5, and this is our last paragraph. The children of God are entitled to the perfect comfort that comes with perfect trust. Until they achieve this, they waste themselves and their true creative powers on useless attempts to make themselves more comfortable by inappropriate means. I just want to stop there because called out. You know what I mean? Just absolutely read to filth, called out by the Course. And again, lovingly, like sometimes I know this is the voice of Jesus, but every once in a while I just can't help but see this as like a Mr. Miyagi figure. And the children of God are entitled to the perfect comfort that comes from perfect trust. This is the state of surrender. The state of every time those thoughts arise that I need to control, I need to know this isn't right. What if this? What if that? What if blah, 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 blah? We surrender that voice. We trust God. And if it helps, you're surrendering to yourself, right? You're not surrendering to anything that you are not. Though perhaps in those moments when surrender is necessary, you have forgotten that you are that. Let's carry on. But the real means are already provided and do not involve any effort at all on their part. Again, this speaks to what you're doing in the process of awakening is just being present. There's no effort. It's just presence. The atonement is the only gift that is worthy of being offered at the altar of God because of the value of the altar itself. It was created perfect and is entirely worthy of receiving perfection. God and his creations are completely dependent on each other. This is interesting, quick metaphysical point on this. God and his creation are completely dependent on each other. It's because it's the same thing. It is a state that flows through us. He depends on them because he created them perfect. He gave them his peace so they could not be shaken and could not be deceived. Whenever you are afraid, you are deceived. One more time. Whenever you are afraid, you are deceived. You can see why the stories of the devil and Satan are particularly helpful, gripping teachings. Now, of course, humanity has done all sorts of things. Very unhelpful, very dogmatic and controlling. And in many ways, this is interesting. In many ways, the true idea of a devil figure sort of tempting you and lying to you and deceiving you, what humanity has done with that story has sort of fed it, you know? Interesting. Interesting what we do with things. Whenever you are afraid, you are deceived, and your mind cannot serve the Holy Spirit. This starves you by denying you your daily bread. God is lonely without his sons, and they are lonely without him. They must learn to look upon the world as a means of healing the separation. The atonement is the guarantee that they will ultimately succeed. They must learn to look upon the world as a means of healing the separation. This is the final message of this passage here. Again, the only thing we are doing here is the atonement, is enlightenment. And the Course is urging us to commit to this. Now, I started this podcast episode by referencing what is happening in the world and the fact that where we're at right now, where we've been for some time, and probably will be for a little while longer, is that we are all being brought to the surrender point. The point in which all of the games that we have been playing in the physical world, where we have thought, yeah, you know what, spirituality is good and it's nice, but you gotta have balance. You gotta be balanced. And look where that's gotten us. I mean, there's whole pockets of cultures that just don't have any spiritual connection whatsoever. But even in the ones that do, there's this 1 foot out, 1 foot in concept. Now, of course, certainly not in all. There's many indigenous cultures that have been fully both feet in terms of spiritual vision for a very long time. So those cultures and those communities exist. But it's about time the rest of us catch up. And I have a feeling the curriculum is unfolding in such a way that we're not going to have much of a choice much longer. Again, the Course says you can procrastinate. Like, for sure, you guys can take your sweet time with this all you want. But eventually we are all brought to the place of saying to ourselves that there must be a better way. Again, to end, we must learn to look upon the world as a means of healing the separation. We use what is in front of us to remember what we actually are, to heal the broken, illusionary state of duality, and reconnect to Christ consciousness. All right, guys, that is going to do it for this week. I hope that you found this helpful. Audience participation. I forgot to come up with one of those. So I guess what I'll say is if you could subscribe to this podcast and share it with somebody, I would definitely appreciate that. It helps me with what I do, helps to get this message to more people. Other than that, I will leave it here for this week. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one.